It wasn't the flimsy lingerie of a mistress that ended the Livingston dynasty. It was a dress, a simple, decade-old navy blue wool dress. When Bailey Vance wore it to the annual family dinner, she knew it was a gamble. Her husband, Lucas, despised it. His new friend would find it pathetic. But Bailey wasn't dressing for them. The woman who mocked it, a smug intruder named Crystal, thought she was delivering the killing blow. She didn't realize that the silent man at the head of the table, her lover's father, Arthur Livingston, wasn't just a patriarch. He was a judge, and the sentence he was about to deliver would silence the room and destroy everyone, except the woman in the moth-eaten dress. The dining room at the Livingston estate was a mausoleum of old money. Its walls were a deep burgundy, the color of dried blood, and the mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, was long enough to host a state dinner. At one end, a massive unlit fireplace yawned, and above, the crystal chandelier, Bailey's personal enemy, cast a light that was brilliant but offered no warmth. It only exposed flaws. Bailey Vance, wife of Lucas Livingston, was currently inspecting those flaws. She ran a finger over a fork. Perfect. She adjusted a wine glass a millimeter to the left. Perfect. She was a curator in a museum no one visited, a museum of her own suffocating marriage. Tonight was the annual Livingston Foundation dinner. It wasn't a charity gala, despite the name. It was a mandatory family summons disguised as a formal meal. It was the night where the family patriarch, Arthur Livingston, reviewed his empire and, by extension, his family's performance. Bailey felt the familiar prickle of anxiety under her skin. Lucas had been different for 8 months. Different was the polite term. The clinical term was absent. He was a ghost in their 10,000-square-foot home, a man who smelled perpetually of a perfume that wasn't hers, a sharp, aggressive scent of gardenia and musk. He was all late nights, hushed phone calls, and new venture meetings that left mysterious, astronomical receipts in his jacket pockets. Bailey was not a fool. She was just tired. She retreated upstairs to get dressed. She bypassed the closet full of gowns Lucas had bought her, shiny, constricting things that felt like costumes. Instead, she went to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. She pulled out the dress. It was simple. Navy blue wool, high-necked, long-sleeved. It had been her mother's. It was the dress she'd worn to her first-ever dinner with the Livingstons, a terrified 24-year-old artist meeting the formidable Arthur. He had nodded at her, a rare sign of approval. Good fabric, he'd grunted. Honest. Now, it was her armor. It was the last thing she owned that felt real. When she came downstairs, Lucas was already at the sideboard, pouring a heavy scotch. He wore a Brioni suit that screamed, "I'm important," but his tie was crooked. He saw her, and his face curdled. "Really, Bailey? That thing? Tonight? Are you trying to embarrass me?" "It's a classic," Bailey said, her voice flat. "It's warm. It's a funeral shroud," he snapped, taking a gulp of his drink. "My father expects a certain image. You look like the Help." "The Help is wearing designer aprons I selected, Lucas. They look lovely," she retorted. He glared, about to argue, when the chime of the grandfather clock echoed through the hall. 7 p.m. The guests would arrive any second. "Whatever," he muttered, adjusting his cuffs. "Just stay quiet tonight. Don't bore Olivia with your pottery class stories, and don't try to impress father. You're not good at it." Bailey's stomach tightened. He wasn't just distant anymore. He was cruel. The first to arrive were Lucas's sister, Olivia, and her husband, Mark. Olivia was sharp, perceptive, and the only Livingston Bailey genuinely liked. She gave Bailey a hug, her eyes scanning Bailey's face with concern. "You okay, Elle? You look tired." "Just preparations," Bailey lied. Then came the giants, Arthur and Margaret Livingston. Margaret, his wife, was a whisper of Chanel No. 5 and polite smiles, a woman who had successfully turned a blind eye to her husband's ruthless business practices for 40 years. Arthur was the opposite. He was a block of granite, a man of 65 who looked as if he could still wrestle a bear. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, missed nothing. He nodded at Bailey, his gaze lingering on her dress for a half-second. "Bailey, the table looks acceptable." From Arthur, acceptable was a standing ovation. They settled in the drawing room for cocktails. Lucas was vibrating with a nervous energy, checking his phone every 30 seconds. "Lucas, put that device away," Arthur commanded. "You are present or you are absent. Choose." "Sorry, Father, I have one more guest," Lucas said, his voice a little too high. Bailey froze. Her hand, holding a champagne flute, stopped mid-air. "What?" "Lucas, you didn't tell me. The seating chart. It's fine. It's just a colleague. A key associate for the new venture. She's brilliant. I wanted her to meet Father." "A she?" Olivia murmured, catching Bailey's eye. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound, not the polite chime of the other guests. Lucas practically sprang from his seat, spilling his scotch. "I'll get it." He hurried to the grand foyer, leaving a strained silence in his wake. Bailey could hear his voice, suddenly warm and intimate. "You made it. You look incredible." And then she heard the answering laugh. It was a sound Bailey knew. She'd heard it, faintly, through his phone late at night. A tinkling, arrogant sound. They appeared in the doorway of the drawing room. The woman was everything Bailey was not. She was perhaps 28, poured into a blood-red dress that seemed held together by sheer audacity. Her hair was a raven-black cascade, her lips were a matching red, and her eyes, sharp and dark, were immediately, dismissively, on Bailey. She was dripping in diamonds that looked new, and on her wrist was a Cartier love bracelet. Bailey knew, with the cold certainty of a death sentence, that she was wearing the gardenia and musk perfume. "Everyone," Lucas announced, his arm possessively around the woman's waist. "This is Ms. Crystal Morgan, my business partner. Crystal, this is my family." Crystal's eyes swept the room, calculating. She smiled at Arthur. "Mr. Livingston, it is an absolute honor. I've heard so much about you." Arthur didn't stand. He just watched her, his face a mask. "Ms. Morgan." Crystal then turned her high-wattage smile on Bailey. It didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be Bailey. Lucas has told me a little about you." "Welcome to our home," Bailey said. The words tasted like ash. The logistics of seating the uninvited guest were an immediate, agonizing power play. There was no place card for Crystal Morgan. The table was set for 6. "Oh, goodness," Crystal said, feigning embarrassment as she surveyed the perfect table. "Lucas, you naughty boy, you didn't tell them I was a sure thing? I feel like I'm crashing." "Nonsense," Lucas said, beaming at her. He turned to Bailey, his smile vanishing. "Bailey, fix it. Get another chair." Bailey felt the heat rise in her face. He was ordering her, like the help he'd accused her of resembling. Before Bailey could move, Arthur spoke. "Don't be absurd." The room snapped to attention. "We will not have staff pulling up a folding chair," Arthur said, his voice like gravel. "Olivia, you and Mark, move down one. Ms. Morgan will sit between you and me." It was a masterful, terrible move. Crystal had clearly intended to sit next to Lucas, who was seated opposite his father. Now she was not only separated from her partner, but she was placed directly under the patriarch's scrutinizing gaze. Lucas's face fell, but he didn't dare argue. Crystal, to her credit, recovered quickly. "Oh, how wonderful! I get to sit next to the man himself." The dinner began. The staff, trained by Bailey to military precision, served the first course, a lobster bisque. It was silent, save for the faint click of silver on porcelain. Crystal, however, was not built for silence. "This house is just divine," she gushed, speaking to Arthur but projecting for the whole table. "So much. History. Lucas tells me it's been in the family for generations. It must be so much work to maintain all this old stuff." Margaret Livingston's painted-on smile twitched. "We find it comfortable, Miss Morgan." "Oh, absolutely." Crystal laughed, waving her fork. "I'm just a modern girl. I like things new, sleek. Out with the old, in with the new. That's my business motto." She winked at Lucas, who blushed like a schoolboy. Bailey felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This wasn't a colleague. This was a declaration of war. Crystal wasn't just here to meet the family. She was here to replace her. Olivia leaned slightly toward Bailey, whispering under the cover of a sip of wine. "That woman is an infestation. Are you breathing?" Bailey just shook her head, focusing on her soup. Lucas, meanwhile, was playing the role of the devoted businessman. "Father, Crystal has been an absolute miracle for the new venture. We're projecting 40% growth in the first quarter." "She's a shark." "A shark," Arthur repeated, his tone unreadable. He looked at Crystal. "And what precisely is your field, Ms. Morgan? New ventures is a remarkably vague term." "Digital integration, branding, synergy," Crystal said, rattling off buzzwords. "We're streamlining the acquisitions pipeline for Livingston Holdings, taking legacy assets and making them, well, profitable." "I see," Arthur said. "You make old things profitable." "Exactly. You see, Mr. Livingston, the problem with old money, no offense, is that it gets sleepy. It needs new blood. It needs someone willing to take risks, to be disruptive." As she spoke, she placed her hand on the table. It was a few inches from Arthur's. Her nails were long, red talons. Bailey watched, mesmerized, as Crystal's hand then moved to Lucas's. It was under the table. They thought they were being subtle, but the table's mirror-like polish betrayed them. In the dark reflection of the mahogany, Bailey could see Crystal's fingers intertwine with her husband's. Bailey's breath hitched. A small, involuntary sound escaped her lips. Every head turned. "Are you all right, Bailey?" Margaret asked, her voice tinged with polite annoyance at the interruption. Bailey's eyes were locked on the damning reflection. Lucas snatched his hand back, knocking his water goblet. Water, ice cold, flooded the tablecloth, darkening the white linen as it rushed toward Bailey. "Oh, clumsy me," Lucas yelped, grabbing napkins. But Crystal was faster. She grabbed her own linen napkin, and, instead of tending to the spill, she began dabbing at Bailey. "Oh, Bailey, darling, you look like you've seen a ghost," Crystal cooed, her voice dripping with fake concern. She wasn't helping. Her dabs were aggressive, almost like slaps. "So flustered. You must be exhausted from all this." Bailey recoiled, pushing Crystal's hand away. "I'm fine." "Are you sure?" Crystal said, leaning in. Her gardenia and musk scent was suffocating. "It's just, I get it. Hosting is so stressful, and you're trying so hard." She sat back, her eyes doing a slow, deliberate scan of Bailey, from her pulled-back hair down to her shoes. "I mean, goodness," Crystal said, her voice carrying across the now silent table. "That dress." Bailey froze. "Lucas, darling, you never told me Bailey was so frugal." Lucas, who was still mopping up water, mumbled. Crystal, don't. What? I think it's sweet, Crystal continued, her voice gaining strength. It's so quaint. Is that vintage, or is it just old? It looks a little, forgive me, moth-eaten around the edges. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. Olivia's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Margaret's face went rigid. Bailey felt the blood drain from her face. The dress. Her mother's dress. My goodness! Crystal ploughed on, now sensing she had the floor. She looked at Lucas, pouting. Lucas, honey, you really must take her shopping. You can't have the lady of this magnificent house looking like a governess. A woman in your wife's position should be wearing, well, something from this decade. It just looks sad. Tears, hot and blinding, sprang to Bailey's eyes. She'd been called invisible. She'd been called boring. But sad, that, combined with the mockery of her last link to her mother, was a blade in the chest. She looked at her husband, pleading. Say something, defend me. Tell this viper to be quiet. Lucas just stared at his wet plate. He gave a weak, terrified shrug. He said nothing. Bailey was completely, utterly alone. The chandelier's light felt like an interrogation lamp. I, Bailey stammered, pushing her chair back, intending to flee. Sit down, Bailey. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the humiliation like a diamond cutting glass. It was Arthur. Bailey froze, her hand on the arm of the chair. She looked at her father-in-law. Arthur Livingston had not moved. His hands were folded on the table. His bisque was untouched. He was not looking at Crystal. He was not looking at Bailey. He was staring, with an almost bored intensity, at his son. Lucas, Arthur said again, his voice terrifyingly calm. Lucas jumped, his head snapping up. Yes, father? Ms. Morgan has a great many opinions, Arthur said, slowly articulating each word. Opinions on this house, opinions on this family's sleepy money, and opinions on my daughter-in-law's wardrobe. Crystal, sensing a shift, tried to backtrack. Oh, Arthur, I was just teasing. Girl talk. You know how it is. I do not, Arthur said, turning his icy gaze on her. I am not a girl, and you are not teasing. You are, Miss Morgan, in my home, at my table. And you are, by my estimation, an incredibly stupid woman. Crystal's jaw dropped. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a flush of angry disbelief. I beg your pardon. Pardon denied, Arthur said. You come in here, a guest invited by my son under false pretenses, for I assure you, colleague is not the word. And you proceed to insult my wife's home, my family's legacy, and the woman who has run this house with more grace than you could muster in 1,000 lifetimes. Now wait just a minute. Crystal stood up, her chair scraping loudly. Lucas isn't going to let you talk to me this way. Lucas, tell him. All eyes, including Crystal's, swiveled back to Lucas. Lucas was white as the tablecloth. He looked from his furious, expectant mistress to his granite-faced father. He was a man trapped between an explosion and a glacier. Father, Lucas stammered. Crystal, she's a little passionate, but she's brilliant. The venture, it's the venture, Arthur repeated, his voice laced with contempt. You would let this person humiliate your wife in front of your mother and sister for the venture. She didn't mean it, Lucas pleaded. Bailey, Arthur said, turning to her. Bailey was still standing, trembling. The dress you were wearing, it was your mother's, was it not? Bailey could only nod, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. You wore it, Arthur continued, his voice softening just a fraction. to the first dinner you had with us. 10 years ago. You told my wife you were an artist, that you valued things with souls. You were terrified of me, but you did not flatter me, and you did not lie." He then looked back at Crystal, his eyes turning to steel. "This dress, Miss Morgan, has more character, more dignity, and more value than every disposable, trend-chasing rag in your closet, including the one you are wearing." "How dare you!" Crystal shrieked. "This is a Balmain. It costs more than her entire—" "I know exactly what it is," Arthur cut her off. "I know what it costs. I know when you bought it. And I know whose money you used to do it." A new, different silence fell over the room. This was no longer about a dress. Lucas, who had been pale, was now translucent. "Father, what are you talking about? I gave Crystal a bonus for the venture, for her good work." "A bonus," Arthur mused. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. He snapped it open and laid it flat on the table. "You are a fool, Lucas," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Not just a philanderer. Not just a coward. A complete and utter fool." Crystal's eyes darted to the paper. It looked like a bank statement. Her bravado was gone, replaced by a dawning, panicked horror. What is that?" Lucas asked, his voice cracking. "This," Arthur said, tapping the paper, "is an invoice from a shell corporation, Morgan Creative Solutions, a company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company whose sole director is Ms. Crystal Morgan." Crystal took a step back from the table. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," Arthur promised. "This invoice, dated 3 weeks ago, is for $250,000 for brand consulting services. It was paid, not from your new venture account, Lucas, but from the Livingston Family Trust, an account to which you, as a junior signatory, have emergency access. An account you are not authorized to use for bonuses." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Lucas, the trust! It was a mistake, a clerical error," Lucas shouted, half rising from his chair. "I was going to pay it back. The venture is about to pay out. I just needed to float her." "Float her?" Arthur slammed his hand on the table. The crystal wine glasses rang out in protest. "You stole from your family, Lucas. You stole from your mother, from your sister, from your wife." "I did not. It gets worse," Arthur continued, his voice a relentless hammer, "because this clerical error of $250,000 was just the latest. I had my auditors, a private firm, not our family one, go back 12 months, to the approximate time Ms. Morgan entered your life." He looked at Crystal, who was now frantically, uselessly, pulling at Lucas's arm. "Lucas, let's go. This is insane. He's a crazy old man." "In 12 months, Arthur said, ignoring her completely, "my son has embezzled 1.9 million. Olivia choked on her wine. Mark had to pat her on the back. "It was for the venture," Lucas screamed, his face purple. "It takes money to make money. You taught me that." "I taught you to build, you idiot, not to steal," Arthur roared back. "And where did it go? Did it go into digital integration? Did it go into synergy?" He looked at Crystal. "Or did it go to a down payment on a penthouse in the city, to a new Maserati, to the Balmain dress you're wearing, purchased last Tuesday, to the Cartier bracelet on your wrist, to the diamond earrings in your ears?" Crystal had gone from flushed to ashen. She knew. She was trapped. You've been spying on me?" she whispered. "Ms. Morgan," Arthur said, standing to his full imposing height. "When a rat gets into my house, I don't just spy on it. I track its every move. I find its nest, and I exterminate it." The room was so quiet, Bailey could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the butler's pantry. Lucas was hyperventilating, his chest heaving. Crystal was frozen, her red taloned hands clutching the back of her chair. Bailey herself felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. The tears were gone. The humiliation was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She wasn't watching a family dinner disintegrate. She was watching a building, long rotten at its core, finally collapse. "Arthur," Margaret finally said, her voice trembling. What does this mean? $1.9 million. Lucas. Lucas couldn't speak. He just shook his head, looking at his mother with the wild eyes of a cornered animal. "It means," Arthur said, "that my son is a common thief, and his colleague is his accomplice." "No," Crystal finally found her voice. It was no longer a seductive purr. It was a screech. "I didn't steal anything. Lucas gave me that money. They were gifts. He loves me. He's leaving her for me." She pointed a vicious finger at Bailey. "Tell them, Lucas. Tell them how you're miserable with this moth-eaten prude. Tell them how we're in love. Tell them our venture is real. It was our money, his inheritance." It was the last, desperate gamble of a losing player. She was trying to change the crime from theft to a dispute over love. Lucas looked at Bailey. His eyes were not sorry. They were not guilty. They were full of hate. Hate that she was there. Hate that she was witnessing this. Hate that she, in her stupid, honest dress, was the anchor he was chained to. "It's true," Lucas whispered. Bailey's heart stopped. I can't live like this anymore," Lucas said, gaining a pathetic shred of courage from his mistress's desperation. "Bailey and we're finished. We have been for years. Crystal, she understands me. She's my partner. The money was an investment in our future." "Your future?" Arthur repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You think you have a future?" "Yes, you can't stop me," Lucas snarled, finally standing up to his father, but for the worst possible reason. "I'm taking my share of the trust and I'm leaving with Crystal. You can have your museum, and you can have her." He gestured at Bailey with a final, dismissive wave. Arthur Livingston watched his son's pathetic mutiny. He let the silence stretch, letting Lucas's defiant words hang in the air, unwanted. Then Arthur smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It was the baring of teeth. "Your share?" Arthur said. "Lucas, you have been a junior partner at this firm for 10 years. You have sat on the board. Did you not read the trust charter? The one your great-grandfather wrote in 1953? "What about it?" Lucas snapped. "The morality clause," Arthur said simply. Lucas's face went blank. What?" "The Livingston Family Trust, Article 4, Section 2, Arthur recited from memory, as if reading a death warrant. "Access to the principal is contingent upon the beneficiary remaining of sound moral character. This includes, but is not limited to, avoidance of public scandal, criminal conviction, and acts of profound personal disloyalty or dishonor that bring the family name into disrepute." That's archaic," Crystal scoffed. "That wouldn't hold up in court." "It has been challenged twice, in 1971 and 1994, Arthur replied, his voice booming. "It has been upheld by the state Supreme Court, twice, embezzling $1.9 million from the family itself, and bringing your paramour into the family home to publicly humiliate your wife. I believe a judge would find that profoundly dishonorable." Lucas collapsed back into his chair. He wasn't breathing. "You have no share, Lucas," Arthur said. "You have no future. You have no venture. As of this moment, you are suspended from the board. Your access to all company and family accounts is frozen. Your corporate cards are cancelled. The car you drove here will be retrieved by my driver tonight." "You can't," Lucas whispered, tears of pure terror now streaming down his face. You can't. I'm your son. I'm your only son." "No," Arthur said, the granite finally cracking to reveal something colder beneath. "You are a liability. I am a businessman. I am cutting my losses." He then turned, with a terrifying finality, to Crystal. "Ms. Morgan." Crystal, who had been watching Lucas's future evaporate, turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "You have 30 seconds to leave my house," Arthur said. "You will leave the earrings, the bracelet, and the keys to the Maserati on the hall table. They are assets bought with stolen funds. If you do not, I will have my security. Mr. Henderson is right outside the door. Detain you for theft." This is insane." Crystal looked at Lucas. "Lucas, do something." Lucas was a puddle. He was sobbing into his hands, a pathetic, broken creature. Crystal's face twisted in contempt. Her partner was useless. She realized she was on her own. With a snarl of pure hatred, she ripped the diamond studs from her ears, wincing in pain. She tore the Cartier bracelet from her wrist, scratching her own skin, and threw them onto the table. They skittered across the mahogany and came to rest near the gravy boat. "You're a monster," she hissed at Arthur. "I am a Livingston," he replied. "You mistook my son's weakness for my own, a fatal error." She glared at Bailey. "And you think you've won? You're still married to that," she spat, gesturing at the weeping Lucas. "You're stuck with him. Have fun with your moth-eaten life." She turned and stormed out of the dining room. A moment later, the front door slammed shut, rattling the crystal chandelier. The room was left with the sound of Lucas's weeping. Bailey looked at her husband. Crystal was right. She was still married to him. She was stuck. She felt a wave of nausea. After all this, after the fraud, the mistress, the humiliation, this was her prize. A broken, criminal husband. "Bailey." She looked at Arthur. His face was grim. "You are not stuck," he said, as if reading her mind. "Father, please," Lucas begged, crawling from his chair. He tried to grab his father's leg. "Please, don't do this. I'll go to rehab. I'll do anything. Bailey, tell him. Tell him you forgive me. We can fix this." Bailey looked down at the man clutching at her feet, his tears staining the hem of her mother's dress. The dress he hated. The dress Crystal mocked. The dress that had, in its own way, started this avalanche. She felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty cold. She pulled her dress free from his grasp. "No, Lucas," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through his sobs. "We can't." She looked at Arthur. "What happens now?" "Now," Arthur said, gesturing to the chair Crystal had abandoned. "You sit, we finish our dinner, and we discuss the vacancy on the board." Lucas stared, his mouth agape. "What? What? Vacancy?" "Yours," Arthur said, as if stating the obvious. He sat back down. "Bailey, please, sit. The food is getting cold." Bailey, moving almost in a trance, returned to her seat. Olivia and Mark were watching the exchange as if it were a tennis match, their heads swiveling between Arthur, Lucas, and Bailey. Margaret had her eyes closed, as if a migraine was setting in. But she didn't leave. You're replacing me?" Lucas sputtered, climbing to his knees. "With her? She's an artist. She makes pots." Bailey flinched, but Arthur raised a hand. "Bailey has not made pots in 3 years, Lucas. You would know that if you ever spent 5 consecutive minutes at home." Arthur looked at Bailey, and for the first time there was a glimmer of... was it pride? "You've been wondering," Arthur said to his son, "how I found out about Ms. Morgan's creative solutions and the transfers. You assumed I had you followed. I did. But they only confirmed the affair. They didn't find the money." "Then who?" Lucas whispered. "Bailey did," Arthur said simply. Lucas's head snapped toward his wife. You told him?" The betrayal in his voice was so profound, so misplaced, it was almost comical. Bailey shook her head. "No, not exactly. This was the part of the story no one knew. Not even Arthur. Not yet." Bailey began, finding her voice. It was rusty, but it was hers. "I started seeing the receipts, Lucas, 6 months ago. Clothes, hotels, a charge for CM designs on your personal Amex. I thought it was just the affair." She looked at her plate. "I was sad. But I was also angry. You told me we had to cut back on the foundation's donations. You said my pottery studio was an unjustifiable expense. Yet you were spending thousands on her. So I started looking," Bailey continued. The whole table was silent, listening. "You're careless, Lucas. You leave your laptop open. You use Livingston as your password for everything. I got into your personal accounts. Then I got into your venture accounts." "Bailey," Lucas breathed, horrified. "And what I found," she said, her voice hardening, "wasn't just an affair. It was this. The 1.9 million, it wasn't just bonuses. It was systematic. You were liquidating assets. You were moving money from the trust to the venture account, then from the venture to Crystal's shell company. You were covering your tracks, but you were sloppy. So you ran to my father," Lucas accused her. "No," Bailey said, looking at Arthur. "I didn't. I compiled it. I put all the bank statements, all the wire transfers, all the invoices into a single file. I was going to confront you, Lucas. I was going to use it as leverage. For a fair divorce." "Then why?" Lucas gestured wildly. "I didn't send it to him," Bailey said. "Not directly. 2 weeks ago, I created an anonymous email. I sent the entire file, with a simple note, 'You have a rat in your house,' to one person. The one person I knew was as meticulous as I was." She looked at her sister-in-law. "I sent it to Olivia." Olivia, who had been silent, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The concerned shareholder email? That was you," Bailey nodded. Olivia turned to her father. Father, I got it. I didn't know who it was from. It looked insane. But the data was clean. I brought it to you. I thought it was a corporate rival." Arthur stared at Bailey. The pieces were clicking into place. He hadn't found the money. Bailey had. She had bypassed her weak husband, bypassed her intimidating father-in-law, and gone to the one person she trusted to be both rational and loyal. Olivia. Bailey had set the entire trap. Arthur let out a slow breath. He stared at his daughter-in-law, truly seeing her for the first time in a decade. He wasn't looking at an artist. He was looking at a forensic accountant. "You," Arthur said, "have been running the ledgers for this entire estate, haven't you? Unofficially. For years." It was true. Lucas was supposed to manage the household finances, but he was incompetent. Bailey had quietly taken over, balancing the books, managing the staff payroll, overseeing the investments for the properties. She'd learned. She'd gotten good. "You," Arthur said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "are the unseen auditor." He looked at his weeping son on the floor. "And you mocked her dress. You called her a potter. You, Lucas, are the dumbest man I have ever had the misfortune to know." "Bailey." "Why?" Lucas whimpered. "Why would you do this to me?" Bailey finally looked at him, the man she had once loved, the man who had promised to protect her, the man now sniveling on the floor. "You asked me why I wore this dress tonight," she said, her voice ice. "You called it a funeral shroud. You were right. It's the funeral. For this. For us. For the man I thought you were. You brought that woman into my home. You let her mock my mother. You humiliated me for the last time, Lucas." She stood up, straight and tall. Her mother's dress didn't feel moth-eaten. It felt like steel. "I am not replacing you on the board, Lucas. You were never really there. I'm just making it official." She looked at Arthur. "I will not sit on the board. Not as Bailey Livingston." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I'll take the position," Bailey said, "on one condition. My divorce is handled by your legal team. My settlement is not tied to Lucas. It is a golden parachute, effective immediately, funded by the trust. And my title is Chief Financial Officer of the entire Livingston Holdings, because I'm the only one in this family, besides you, who actually knows where all the money is." Arthur Livingston stared at Bailey. The audacity of the demand was breathtaking. She wasn't asking, she was negotiating. She had all the leverage. She had just exposed the $1.9 million theft, saved the family from further embarrassment, and unmasked herself as the only competent financial mind in her generation of the family. Lucas, hearing this, let out a noise of pure despair. "CFO? She can't. Father, that's my trajectory. That was—" "Your trajectory," Arthur interrupted, his voice flat, "currently involves a meeting with Mr. Henderson from our legal department, followed by a probable meeting with the district attorney. Be silent." He returned his gaze to Bailey. She didn't waver. She stood there, regal in her quaint dress, a queen who had just checkmated the entire board. A long, slow smile spread across Arthur's face. It was genuine. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur called out, not raising his voice, but it carried. A side door from the study opened. A tall man in a severe black suit entered. This was Henderson, the family's fixer, the man who had been waiting for the signal. He was holding a leather briefcase. "Sir?" "Mr. Henderson," Arthur said, "it seems we have a change of plans. We are no longer just dealing with a family matter. We are dealing with a recruitment." He gestured to Bailey. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like you to meet Bailey Vance. She will be our new acting CFO, pending board approval, which I will provide." Henderson's eyebrows shot up, but he was a professional. He nodded. "Ms. Vance?" "Mr. Henderson," Bailey replied, her voice firm. "And Mr. Henderson," Arthur continued, "you will also be handling Ms. Vance's divorce from my son. I want your top litigator on it. She is to be well compensated for her services to this family. Her severance from this marriage will be retroactive to the day she started unofficially managing this estate's finances, with interest." "Very good, sir," Henderson said, making a note. "And Lucas," Arthur said, looking down at his son. Lucas had gone utterly still. The reality was setting in. "Father, no, please, I'm your blood." "You are," Arthur said, and for a moment, a flicker of genuine sadness crossed his face. "And that is why you will not go to jail." Lucas let out a sob of relief. "Instead," Arthur continued, "you will sign this." Henderson stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the table. He snapped it open. Inside was not a stack of cash, but a thick, leather-bound document. He placed it in front of Lucas. "This," Arthur explained, "is your full resignation from Livingston Holdings. It is also a legal document that signs over your entire stake in the family trust present and future, to your sister, Olivia, and to your wife, Bailey, to be split evenly." "What?" Olivia yelped. I don't want—" "You will take it, Olivia," Arthur said, "because you are loyal, and because Bailey will be managing it, so it will actually grow for a change." This leaves me with nothing," Lucas shrieked. "You're disinheriting me." "I am," Arthur agreed. "In exchange for this signature, the family, and by family, I mean Ms. Vance, will not press criminal charges for the $1.9 million. We will absorb the loss. You will be given a one-time severance of $50,000. You will be flown to our condo in, let's say, Miami. It's suitably vulgar for your tastes. And you will never, ever use the Livingston name in a business context again. You will be, for all intents and purposes, a Mr. Smith. A Mr. Smith," Lucas repeated, horrified. I can't." "You can," Arthur said. "Or Mr. Henderson can call the police. The documentation Bailey prepared is quite thorough. I believe the term is open and shut. You have 1 minute to decide." Lucas looked at the document. He looked at his father's merciless face. He looked at his sister's shocked one. He looked at his mother, who was now weeping silently into a napkin. And finally, he looked at Bailey. She was not smiling. She was not vengeful. She was just finished. She was looking at him as if he were a line item, a bad debt to be written off. With a trembling hand, Lucas reached for the pen Henderson offered. He uncapped it. "I hate you," he whispered, the words directed at Bailey. "I hate you. You did this." "No, Lucas," Bailey said quietly, as he began to sign his life away. "You did. I just kept the receipts." He signed the last page. Henderson immediately gathered the documents, placed them in his briefcase, and snapped it shut. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur said, "please have my driver, Thomas, escort Lucas to a hotel for the night, and then retrieve the Maserati Miss Morgan abandoned downtown, and, Henderson, have the penthouse Crystal was renting completely cleared out by noon tomorrow. Send her belongings to a shelter." "Yes, sir," Henderson nodded at Lucas. "This way, sir." Lucas, a 40-year-old man who had just lost an empire, stood up. He was hollowed out. He didn't look at anyone. He just shuffled out of the room, following the lawyer, a ghost in a Brioni suit. The front door opened and then closed. He was gone. A heavy silence filled the room. Margaret was crying. Olivia was staring into her wine glass. Arthur Livingston sat down. He looked at the half-eaten bisque. He looked at the spilled water. He looked at the discarded diamonds. Then he looked at Bailey. "Well, Bailey," he said, picking up his napkin. "A bit of a disruptive dinner, but effective." He raised his wine glass to her. "Welcome to the company." The 6 months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were a brutal, corporate restructuring. The Livingston name, which had been stained by Lucas's and Crystal's recklessness, had to be scrubbed clean. Bailey Vance, she dropped Livingston the day the divorce was finalized, was not an artist. She was a surgeon. Working from the main office, not the estate, she dove into the legacy assets Crystal had been streamlining. She found that Crystal and Lucas's venture was a house of cards. They had been using the trust money to acquire near-bankrupt tech startups, promising them a Livingston partnership, and then using their inflated stock values to secure loans, which they then funneled to Crystal's offshore account. It wasn't just theft, it was a complex, multi-layered fraud scheme. Bailey, with Arthur's blessing and Henderson's legal team, spent weeks unwinding it. She saved 2 of the startups, cut 3 loose, and managed to reclaim, through aggressive litigation against Crystal, nearly $1.1 million of the stolen funds. Crystal Morgan, it turned out, was not as smart as she thought. She had kept meticulous records, believing they were her insurance against Lucas. Instead, they became her conviction. Faced with a RICO lawsuit, she settled, returning everything, and vanished into obscurity, her reputation in the financial world permanently destroyed. Lucas as Mr. Smith lasted 2 months in Miami before he burned through his $50,000. Arthur received a single, desperate collect call, which he did not accept. The last anyone heard, Lucas was working on a charter boat in the Keys, a shadow of the man he'd pretended to be. And Bailey? It was exactly 1 year after that fateful dinner, the annual Livingston Foundation meeting. The dining room at the estate was set again, the chandelier polished and bright, but the room was different. The heavy, blood-red drapes were gone, replaced with a light, airy cream. The table was still long, but the chairs were more comfortable. Margaret and Olivia were there, chatting happily. Mark was discussing a new project with Arthur. Bailey arrived last. She wasn't wearing a power suit, and she wasn't wearing her mother's dress. She wore an elegant, modern, navy blue silk dress. It was hers. She was radiant. She took her seat, not next to Arthur, but at the opposite end of the table, the seat that had, for 40 years, been reserved for the heir. Arthur Livingston raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice ringing with genuine warmth, to the past year. A difficult one, but a profitable one. Our holdings are up 22%. Our name is stable, and our future is secure. He smiled at Bailey, to our new CFO, to the true head of this table, Bailey. To Bailey, Olivia and Margaret echoed, their smiles wide and real. Bailey raised her glass. The light from the chandelier, once so cold and exposing, now seemed to sparkle. It wasn't catching her flaws, it was illuminating her strength. She had taken the moth-eaten life Crystal had mocked and rewoven it into an empire. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the architect. It was one thing to win a war. It was another thing entirely to govern the peace. Bailey Vance learned this in the 18 months that followed her installation as CFO. The victory at the dinner table had been sharp and final, a surgical removal of a tumor. But the body, Livingston Holdings, was still weak, and the scent of blood lingered in the water. That scent had attracted a new shark. Kensington Global, a ruthless competitor run by a man named Julian Thorne, had been circling for months. Thorne saw the Livingston scandal not as a resolved issue, but as a crack in the foundation. He saw a legacy company, once run by a fool, Lucas, now run by a family patriarch, Arthur, and an untested potter, Bailey. He decided to strike. The hostile takeover bid was announced at 8:01 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 9:00 a.m., the emergency board was convened in the main conference room, a sterile glass box on the 40th floor that Bailey had redesigned. Bailey, in a charcoal grey suit, stood at the head of the long glass table. Arthur was at her right, his face a mask of stone. Olivia and Mark were present, and, in a new and uncomfortable development, Margaret Livingston sat directly opposite Bailey. Since Lucas's exile, Margaret had changed. Her polite, Chanel-scented whisper had been replaced by a quiet, steely vigilance. She had taken Lucas's vacant seat on the board, claiming she would protect the family legacy that my son so carelessly discarded. In truth, she was there to watch Bailey. She was a ghost at the feast, a constant, silent reminder of what Bailey had cost the family. "Kensington's bid is 30% over market value," Bailey began, her voice crisp and steady, clicking through a presentation. "It's an aggressive all-cash offer. They are leveraging the press from 2 years ago." Their narrative is that our leadership is in flux, and that our $1.9 million loss was the tip of the iceberg. They are painting me as a palace coup, not a recovery. So we fight, Olivia said immediately. We issue a statement. We tell them to go to hell. They've already factored that in, Bailey said. A simple no makes us look weak, like we're just clinging to the past. They'll just raise their offer, and our shareholders will get nervous. Julian Thorne doesn't lose. He's a bully, and you cannot just say no to a bully. You have to punch him in the mouth. She clicked to the final slide. It was a picture of a much smaller, sleeker company logo. Aperture Labs. This, Bailey said, is our punch. Aperture Labs is a small-cap AI logistics firm. They are, frankly, brilliant, and they are on the verge of a massive government contract. Kensington also wants them. They've been trying a quiet acquisition for months. My proposal is that we buy them. Now. Today. Mark, the cautious one, frowned. Bailey, that's a massive capital expenditure. We'd have to leverage, well, almost everything, to make a bid that fast. It's a huge gamble. It's a shark repellent, Bailey countered. We acquire Aperture, and two things happen. One, we instantly integrate their tech, making our legacy assets suddenly cutting edge. Two, we take on a significant strategic debt. We become too big, too complex, and too expensive for Kensington to swallow. The takeover bid dies. Arthur, who had been listening intently, nodded. A slow smile formed. You're not just building a wall, Bailey. You're poaching his next meal. It's aggressive. I like it. I do not. The voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Margaret Livingston placed her manicured hands flat on the glass table. I do not like it at all, Margaret repeated, her eyes locked on Bailey. It's reckless, it's flashy, it's desperate. It's strategic, Margaret, Bailey said, trying to keep her tone even. Is it? Margaret's voice was laden with 2 years of ice. Or is it just the kind of overconfident, high-risk gamble that someone else used to make? The air was sucked from the room. She had done it. She had finally said his name. You are comparing this, Bailey said, her voice dangerously low. To Lucas. Am I? Margaret said, standing up. The polite mask was gone. In its place was the raw, grieving face of a mother. My son. My foolish, weak, terrible son. He also loved flashy ventures. He also loved aggressive moves. He also loved spending money we didn't have to look powerful. Margaret, that is not what this is, Arthur interjected, his voice a low warning. Isn't it, Arthur? Margaret snapped, turning on her husband. You sat there and let this outsider systematically dismantle our family. You let her push your own son out into the cold. She exposed a thief, Margaret, Arthur roared. She created a vacancy, Margaret shot back. She saw her opening and she took it. She didn't just save the company, Bailey. You took it. You took my son's home. You took his name. You took his birthright. And now you stand there, in his place, telling us to gamble what's left on Aperture. She looked at Bailey, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it was bottomless. You are just like him, only smarter, colder. You are just as ruthless, just as hungry. And I will not stand by and watch another venture burn this family to the ground. The accusation hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. Bailey was a usurper, a colder, more competent version of the man she had replaced. Bailey looked at Margaret. She didn't look at Arthur for help. She didn't look at Olivia for support. She just stood at the head of the table, absorbing the hatred. When she spoke, her voice was not angry. It was exhausted, and it was final. You are right about one thing, Margaret, Bailey said quietly. I am hungry, I am ruthless, and I am cold. I am everything this company needed when your son was setting it on fire to warm his mistress. She stepped away from the screen and walked until she was standing directly in front of Margaret. Lucas was a gambler. A gambler, by definition, has no plan. He just throws the dice and prays. I have not prayed in 2 years. I have planned. She slapped a second 500-page document onto the table. This is my due diligence on Aperture. This is their balance sheet. These are the projections. This isn't a flashy venture. It's the future. Your son, my ex-husband, stole $1.9 million to buy diamond earrings and a life he didn't earn. I am leveraging our assets to acquire a firm that will increase our value by 40% in 3 years, while simultaneously protecting us from the wolf at the door. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. You have every right to mourn your son. You are his mother. But I am the CFO, and I will not let your grief, your willful blindness, be the thing that finally does what Lucas and Crystal couldn't. She straightened up. I am not him. He took. I build. And I am building our defense. Now. Today. She looked at Arthur. I'm calling the vote. Margaret was pale, trembling, but she held Bailey's gaze. The hatred was still there, but it was now laced with a new, terrifying respect. Arthur looked at his wife. Margaret. Margaret stared at Bailey for a long, 10-second silence. Finally, she gave a single sharp nod. Vote. All in favor of the Aperture acquisition, Arthur said. 4 hands went up. Arthur's, Olivia's, Mark's, and Bailey's. Margaret sat still. Then, slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, her hand rose too. The motion passes, Bailey said, her voice devoid of triumph. She had won. Again. But as she watched Margaret deflate, she realized the truth. The battle against Lucas had been easy. He was a fool. The battle against Margaret. That was a war she would have to win every single day for the rest of her life. The crown was hers, but it was, and always would be, unbearably heavy. And that is how Bailey Vance turned the most profound humiliation of her life into the ultimate victory. She proved that class isn't about the price tag of your dress, and power isn't about the name you're born with. It's about intelligence, it's about patience, and it's about knowing exactly when to send the email. The Livingston Empire was never meant for Lucas. It was just waiting for a real boss. What do you think of Arthur's brutal decision? Was it perfect justice, or was he too cold, even to his own son? And what about Bailey's masterful play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of karma and consequences, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with a friend who needs to see justice served, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that bell. We have so much more real-life drama coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single story.